One of the things that comes up over and over again is this issue of something called a hidden curriculum. I went to the Meet the Markers conference and I felt this feeling of anxiety. It would take such a long time sometimes to try and find the best ways to teach things. If I can create like an open source platform where all of that information is readily available to teachers, I think that would be ideal.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of our weekly recap. I have with me Genevieve Firmer. So Jen is actually another sort of colleague at the University of Sydney. So she's currently working in chemistry research. So to begin the introduction, Jen did a Bachelor's of Science at the University of Sydney. And after completing that, she went on to do a Master's of Teaching at Deakin University. What did you sort of do at Sydney, and sort of how did that sort of lead you into doing a Master's of Teaching at Deakin after that?
Yeah, so I started off coming into uni really wanting to do a major in physics, actually.
Right.
And I got through my first 6 to 12 months in physics and sort of realised it wasn't exactly for me. It was much more theoretical than what I was looking for. And I'd really enjoyed chemistry in high school, and I started to enjoy it more at uni. So I moved towards chemistry, and I moved towards more medicinal chemistry, pharmacology. And so I ended up with a major in chemistry and pharmacology at the end of my time. I was sort of weirdly, like, the teaching thing for me didn't appear until maybe a couple of weeks before I graduated, actually. I took a friend along to she didn't want to go by herself. I went along to an information session about a teaching graduate program. I knew from some of the organisations I've been involved in outside of uni that I really enjoyed working with students. I really enjoyed teaching. I really enjoyed watching kids learn. And then I had some issues with the way the school system was running, some things that bothered me, but I thought, that's not really for me. I want to do science. I'm going to be a scientist. And then I just sort of went to this information session, learned a lot more about how, like, I knew my education, I was quite privileged, but I didn't quite realise how disparate and how different education experiences were for students outside of metropolitan areas and students not with high economic backgrounds. I didn't realise how different it was. So I became a little bit more passionate about it, and then I got to the point where I had to make a decision. I had an option to go into honours and do some chemistry research in some kind of medicinal chemistry, like making new medicines, or I could apply for this teaching program. And I just sort of realised, hang on, there's one I'm a lot more passionate about. There's one that I know I'll enjoy. I don't really want to be sitting at a desk or in a lab. I want to be outside enjoying things. I know I like working with kids, and there's kids out there who need us. There's a lot of schools that don't have access to teachers because they're in rural, remote areas. It's really tough, and those kids really want to be learning. And I was like, hey, I could be that person to be there. And so I did. I was like, all right, I'll apply to this program. And as I applied, you had to write about why you wanted to be in the program, and I just realized more and more how much the set of skills I had fit, and how much I really, really wanted to be working in a school. And so it was a bit of a shock to my friends and family when I was like, yep, okay, I'm moving to the Northern Territory and I'm going to be a teacher. But it was the best decision I ever made.
I think there were actually a lot of really interesting points you brought up, just even in that sort of brief introduction. I guess the first one that I sort of want to draw the students' attention to, because I thought it was really nice, is the fact that when you were sort of applying to this teaching program, you were forced to sort of do an application to answer questions, and having to sort of, I guess, reflect and speak about what you're passionate about actually gave you even more conviction to sort of follow through with it.
Definitely. I was not even going to apply, and they just convinced me. They were like, put in an application, you can defer it if you want to, doesn't matter. And when I sat down to write the application, I realised how much it was really a good fit for me. I wouldn't have realised if I hadn't made the jump to actually write the application. It was very interesting.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And I think definitely for the students listening, I really implore you guys to try and take this as an example to really think about what you really want to be doing right now. Because I know, with our students, right, me and Wayne, we've tried to sit down with you guys and have our one-on-one chats every now and then, and a lot of you guys have sort of really enjoyed that. You've told us, it's really good to actually speak about these things. You can talk about this stuff with your friends and your teachers at school as well. Like, it doesn't have to be like the usual playground small talk where you're just like, how you going? School sucks, right? You know, like, you could ask difficult questions. I was always a weird kid back in high school, which I think you guys got the impression from after a few of these episodes. But I spent so many hours in my final years of high school just like going up to people like, hey, what do you think is wrong with the education system? You know, and just having those debates back and forth. I know a lot of you guys tell me, oh, I don't really know what I want to do, right? Have those chats, and I think you'll find yourself changing your mind.
And it's not just what do I want to do, it's like, what do I enjoy doing? What do I want to be doing with my time? What's going to make me happy? You'll find something.
Well, one other thing that I thought was pretty interesting was you mentioned sort of already, I guess, when you were already just leaving high school and just starting with uni, you already had ideas on sort of what you believed about the education system and particular issues or flaws that you saw in that. So, like, I guess out of interest, what sort of things were sort of big on your mind regarding that?
There are a couple of things. I think from my experience in high school, I was a bit of an out-of-the-box thinker. I loved the open-ended questions. I loved when I could answer in a way that I wanted to. I loved, you know, you'd be given a debate question and obviously you're supposed to pick one side. I loved picking the other side and seeing, like, challenging myself to see if I could argue it. But when I got to, like, the HSC, you were rewarded. I felt like I was being rewarded for answering a particular question in a particular way, and I had to somehow learn that word in the question meant that I had to use this word in the answer. And I hated it. I didn't want to spend my time learning which words to use in an exam. I wanted to really understand, like, the quantum model of the atom, but my teacher was like, no, you can't do that because you've got to get better marks by answering the question in this way. And I was really frustrated by that. I was a kind of learner. I think research is really where I found my place because I'm allowed to think outside of the box, and now it's a good thing. But my whole school experience, it was really tough because I just didn't want to be thinking the way I was supposed to, and so that challenged me a little bit. I also did a bit of work volunteering with some kids through the Edmund Rice camps who are often kids who are having a bit of a hard time at home, don't get holidays, a lot of them in foster care, and I had a long chat with a lot of them who were saying how much they hated school. They really, really hated school. But then we'd be out there and a butterfly would fly past. And I remember one, it was like this huge butterfly. It was a big brown one with beautiful patterns on its wings, and it landed on the wall, and there was one girl in particular, she was so fascinated about it and she wanted to tell me all about it. And I was like, this kid loves learning. She loves learning. Why doesn't she want to be at school? And I was like, there's got to be a problem if the place where kids are supposed to go to learn and go to love learning is not school. That school is not that place for so many students. And that really got to me. That really bothered me. And then sort of the last thing that really got me over the line for becoming really passionate was I think I hope it isn't happening as much anymore, but for me growing up, I had really strong female role models in science in my family. My mum's a pharmacist. I've got grandmothers who are very good at maths, so that was always okay. But particularly when I got to uni, I realised a lot of girls around me were told that they were told to stay away from science and maths and STEM because they were girls. I remember I was even told that I wasn't allowed to do 3 sciences in the HSC. I had to pick 2 because well, I was a girl, I probably wasn't going to actually do science, so I had to pick. And that was the worst thing ever. Like, I'm glad I was a bit more all-rounded now, but I was really sad that I couldn't do all 3 sciences, all of chem, physics, and bio. I had to make a really hard decision. And I met a lot of girls, because I went to an all-girls college, St. Sophia College at Sydney Uni, and a lot of girls around me were told, like, no, you can't do science. Don't be in the chemistry class. Don't be in the physics class. Like, you're the only girl. Like, what are you doing? You shouldn't be here. You don't belong here. And that really upset me, that so many people are still being told you're not smart enough to be in science, because I think, girls aren't smart enough to be in science, because it's not true. You should be in science if you're passionate about science. Like, that's all it should be.
It's so weird, isn't it? Because it's like, it's the sort of stuff where, like, I don't think I heard too much of that sort of stuff from when I was in high school, but it's weird because, like, knowing this stuff exists, even like in this age, we're only like a couple of years apart, this isn't like something that was like decades ago. And do you find that it's almost like, I think it's easy for someone to point at someone who says, oh, girls can't do science because they're not smart enough, and say, yeah, okay, this person's obviously wrong. But do you also find a lot of the times, a lot of this, I guess, messaging that discourages girls from going to STEM is, it's not like the minority who, I guess, just have bad views, but it's more like this bigger group of the old generation who think they're doing the right thing by saying, oh, it'd be worse for you if you went into this area. Like, you wouldn't like it. It wouldn't turn out well, and they sort of think they're looking out for you in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, that comes to a broader issue that I've definitely come around a lot of people. I keep saying adults, but I guess I'm an adult now. But people older than me often like thinking they're protecting children by saying, oh, I don't think you're going to do well in that, so you shouldn't try.
Yeah.
And I hate that. I'm like, if someone really loves it and they wants to be there, they'll find a way to be good at it because they love it. So encourage them all the way. Yeah, I think you're right. A lot of adults think they're really looking out for you, but
Misguided.
If you want to be doing something, you should go at it. You should do it.
Yeah. You took that gamble, tried out for the teaching position, and through that you sort of realized that this is something you might really want to be doing. I think it'd be good for you to talk a little bit about, I guess, the program as a whole, because I think it's something that's probably not super well known about. And I guess it's just one thing where I know a lot of the students that I have right now, in the background that we're from, teaching is definitely something that's kind of not looked upon as favorably. And I think it's changing slowly, but I really want to, like, if there's ever any info out there about like how to get into teaching, what it's really like, I kind of do want to be exposing my students to that. So
yeah, definitely. I think I was from the background too. I was always like, oh, I don't really want to be a teacher. I want to be the person out there actually doing things. Like, I'll let someone else teach those people. And that changed because I realized a teacher can actually have a massive impact on children's lives and really change the course of their life if you're doing the right thing. So my teaching program was through a graduate program called Teach for Australia. It was a postgraduate program, which means you had to have already done an undergraduate degree in one of the areas that we teach at school. And then we did quite a different model, like a model very different to what is done elsewhere, where we're sort of
like the regular Masters of Teaching.
The regular Masters of Teaching, you'd have like 2 years of working, studying full time. You might do a placement of 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 6 months, depends on your university. Placement meaning you're going into a school teaching as sort of a watching another teacher teach, maybe having a go at a couple of lessons, but not necessarily. It depends. With my program, the Teach for Australia program matches you up with a school who needs a teacher in your area. So they're often looking for schools with a low socioeconomic background, usually in rural, remote areas, sometimes metropolitan, but always disadvantaged. And in my case, my school hadn't been able to have a science teacher stay for more than, I think, 3 terms in about 7 years. So when I got through to my first year 12 cohort, they hadn't seen a teacher for a whole 12 months in their whole, in science for their whole schooling.
So it's more like they've just had like substitutes and stuff?
They've had substitutes, or they've had someone for 9 months that's left. Yeah, they haven't been able to like keep them, retain them for 12 months because I was working in Katherine in the Northern Territory. It's about 3 hours south of Darwin. So it is, you have to move. You have to move there. So we basically did an intensive. So I think we did like 6 or 12 weeks, somewhere in the middle of intensive teaching training. So the first semester of our masters over just the summer holidays basically, and then we were allowed to go into the classrooms and teach as a teacher. So I had 0.8% or so 80% of a teaching load, so I was teaching 4 subjects rather than 5, and my other subjects I had about half a day to a full day off each week to be studying my masters at the same time. And that ran for 2 years, and at the end of the 2 years I was what we call a proficient teacher, not a graduate teacher, which meant I was sort of fully certified to be a teacher in a classroom by myself at the end of that time. But I had 2 years of teaching experience rather than 12 weeks, and it meant that I was getting paid as well, which was really good, and really integrating myself into that school atmosphere. Like, I was part of the school by the time I graduated. It wasn't starting from scratch at the beginning.
So one thing I've always wondered about, and I think hopefully I can get some interesting ideas from you on this because you've actually gone and worked with sort of disadvantaged schools, is sort of, I guess, identifying the actual difficulties and obstacles at play to sort of providing what we want to imagine is like the ultimate education experience. Like, what are the obstacles that are preventing us from where we are now to sort of that ideal place where everyone, regardless of socioeconomic background, can get a good education?
That is such a big question. It's a hard question. I think one of the things that immediately pops to mind for me is what does make a good education? What is the ideal education? I think one of the key issues that we see in schools at the moment there's a lot of students that are sort of a bit isolated and shut out from the school system because their personal and family values of what a good education is not aligned with what is generally accepted as a good education. I think particularly from my experience at a school in a rural area with a lot of students who worked on cattle stations, on grain, mining families, truck families, who have been totally successful without going to school, haven't had a great experience of like being at school, like in the generations above the students that I was working with. Why would they want to be at school?
Right.
What are they trying to get out of school? What is school giving to them? And when school is taking you away from the things that you could otherwise be learning that are more useful to you, what is the aim of school? And I think, I'm not sure how well that fits with a lot of metropolitan students, but if the aims of school are not aligned with your aims of what you want to do and learn to be an adult and someone who's going to function in society, that makes it really, really tough for a student to keep wanting to be at school. There's a lot of talk around teachers having too much of a class load in Australian schools at the moment, which makes it really hard to spend the time it takes to go away and think about how I can bring in the interests and things that my students want to learn into the classroom. And
it's such an annoying problem to try and fix, right? Because it's like, on the one hand, we already suffer from a lack of supply of teachers.
Yeah, we do.
And then on the other hand, we want to be sort of like using teachers, like you said, sort of decreasing the student-teacher ratio, which would further increase the demand we would even need for teachers. So it almost feels, I guess, really difficult to work out where do we even get all these teachers from.
From talented young students like yours. I think part of that is this perception in society that teaching is not, like there's so many reasons that our society currently is not valuing teachers as much as we should, and I think that is one of the key shifts that needs to happen, is how can we attract really bright young students and help them realise how important teaching is actually. And that's one of the other things with the Teach for Australia program, is they're picking students with really like high academic success or business success. They're picking successful students to go into teaching, and that's making a difference too.
So the next thing you did was sort of to go back to UCID and to do a master's more in like a research direction. What was sort of your reasons for sort of moving into that path? Like, was there a reason why you decided to switch over at that point in time?
Yeah, so I think I worked myself pretty hard for the 4 years I was teaching, and I definitely needed a break. That was one part of it. I think one of the issues with finding a job you're really passionate about, it can be easy to go too hard and work too hard. And also I think when you're teaching, there's constantly deliverables. Like, you're constantly having to just do a lesson tomorrow, it's all in a short time frame. It's a short time frame. I always wanted to take some more time to spend thinking about how do my students learn, how do they construct ideas, what are the best way to do this, can I find a different experiment that's more fun to teach this chemistry concept, and there's just such limited time to do that. And I really wanted the time to follow some of my ideas. So I'd spent a lot of time thinking about, for example, my chemistry teaching assignment was about the mole concept and how do we construct ideas about what the mole is, and how do we get students to really understand that deeply rather than just algorithmically being able
solve
to
the formula,
do the formula and really have no idea what they're actually doing, which is really, really common in the school system.
100%.
So I'm just loving having all the time in the world now to spend. I've basically got 3 years to just spend as much time as I want thinking about how we learn and how we can teach in more fun ways, more engaging ways.
That's really interesting. So do you sort of see yourself now in terms of your direction as this is like a sort of doing a bit of chemistry research is a way to extend your teaching, or it wasn't more like, did you have thoughts about actually changing direction and actually going further into chemistry research?
I'm not sure yet, and I'm leaving that open. I really have full intentions to go back into teaching. I really like teaching. It's really fun. And I hope that when I go back to teaching after these 3 years of research, I've got like a
mega power,
like so much information at the tips of my fingers about what are the great ways we have that we know are effective for teaching these things. But I'm also seeing that there are other options open, like are there better ways we can write curriculum to support teachers? Are there ways we can manage schools? Can I contribute in those ways? Is academia, more contribution to chemistry education research the best way to go. I don't know yet. But, definitely the intention was to just spend a bit of time improving on my teaching practice, spending time thinking about my teaching practice so I could go back and have more time to focus on my students, because I already knew really good ways to teach all the bits of the curriculum.
You want to sort of like introduce like what you're actually working on with your master's degree? Yeah,
so I'm working on a master's degree. I'm thinking of upgrading to a PhD. So basically I've cut my research into 3 chunks. The ultimate the ultimate plan is to either create resources or make resources that are already there available to teachers. As I said before, it would take such a long time sometimes to try and research and find the best ways to teach things or the way you want to teach something. If I can create like an open source platform where all of that information is readily available to teachers, I think that would be ideal. To get to that point, I need to find those resources, and I need to highlight the areas that we don't have resources in yet. And before I get to that stage, so the one that I'm working on now is looking at what actually is in the chemistry curriculum. I know what's in the chemistry curriculum in South Australia in the Northern Territory. Other teachers know what it's in New South Wales, but some of it's the same and some of it's different, and some of it looks different but is actually the same, and some of it looks the same but it's actually different.
Yeah, and as we've also discussed, there's a lot of unspoken rules as well.
There's a lot of unspoken rules. We'll get to that. But yes, so I'm looking, and we've got the Australian curriculum now. So all of the states are supposed to have a curriculum that mirrors the Australian curriculum. So we're supposed to be teaching approximately the same thing. I'm really interested in, are we actually teaching the same thing? So are there states where we go into more depth in one area than another? Are there states where we teach topics that we don't teach in other states? Are there states that spend more time or less time? Do some of them have a curriculum that forces them to do more experimental inquiry, or some of them more lends themselves to like, there's too much stuff in the curriculum, so we have to teach it in a lecture mode that we know is not a great way to teach students. So I'm interested in comparing all the different states to look at what we have at the moment. And I'm also looking at comparing that to literature, so research published internationally on what should we be teaching in chemistry, how should we write a curriculum to support teachers to be teaching in a way that we want them to be teaching. And I'm also interested in how that meets Australia's needs, because when you're teaching students, you're teaching teenagers and children, you're raising the next generation.
Yeah.
We talk about, we want science to be relevant to what everyone needs.
Not just the science students.
Not just the science students, but definitely we want science to be preparing the next science professionals and science researchers, but we also want it to be something that's worthwhile for everyone. So what things do we want everyone in the society to understand about science, and are we actually meeting that in the curriculum? So there's so many big questions in there in the curriculum.
Yeah.
And then I'll like have it all written down about what we actually want to, what we are teaching, and maybe suggestions for anything else that should be in what we're teaching, and then finding resources, making them available, and highlighting any areas where there are gaps. Because one of the other things I want to do is collaborate with science researchers. So if there are any parts of the curriculum, for example, oxidation of alcohols, equilibrium, that there are ways, things we want students to learn, but we don't really have established ways to do that unless you've got a fume cupboard and you're happy with dealing with carcinogens. Teaming up with science researchers and saying, hey, we've got this gap in the curriculum where we don't have anything to teach, and I know that your research is exactly in line with that. Can you help us? And it takes a lot, like I'm collaborating with someone at the moment working in chemistry research, and it takes a lot less time asking the experts, and suddenly we've got a new experiment that we can use that doesn't need a fume cupboard, it's not going to kill anyone, takes 20 to 30 minutes, much easier way to show a particular chemistry concept than another one. So that's the broad scope of my research. It's still too broad, I've got to narrow it down, but that's where I'm at.
I guess when it's broad, it's more exciting, at least.
I think so.
I think the last time we talked about this, you mentioned how, I guess, your actual way of finding out what is actually in each syllabus is sort of consulting the documentation. But I'm wondering if you had, like, I guess, other methods that you considered, sort of like, you know, like I say, like interviews and surveys with teachers or stuff like that. Like, what sort of methods are you thinking about in terms of working out what's actually in the syllabus?
I've got a couple of options, so I could survey, do a sort of a shallow survey of a whole lot of teachers. It would be a really good way to get a big, broad view. But I think I'm more interested in a really deep view. So I'm really interested in what particular teachers are thinking, where are the areas of difficulty, what parts of the initial teacher education are we not preparing teachers for properly, like where could we focus our efforts to support teachers to teach in the way we really want the curriculum to be.
So one thing I'd really like to know more about is, I guess, what you've found so far with your curriculum analysis, particularly if you've gotten some early information about like those things you're talking about, like what are those areas that teachers don't know about or they think they need more help in, things like that.
So one of the things that comes up over and over again is this issue of something called a hidden curriculum, and there's some debate in the literature what the hidden curriculum actually is. In some ways it talks about what cultural values students need to be already instilled with to do well at school. That is one aspect of hidden curriculum. The other aspect I think that I get a bit more caught up in being a year 11 and 12 teacher is the things students need to do well in their year 12 assessments, those external assessments that go off to the marking board, that are not really written explicitly anywhere. And that's really challenging. Like teachers who've been teaching a really long time, been working in the system a long time, not too hard for them to figure out what's going on, but for new teachers coming in, it's really, really tough. At the end of each year after the exam has been done, it's marked in the examination centre, usually a capital city, and the marks are fed back to schools. In some states, the teachers get access to the exams. In some states, they get access to the marks for each question. In some states, they only get access to the overall moderated mark. So the amount of information that goes back to the teachers really depends on the state. Which makes it really hard to know what did I do well as a teacher, what did I not do well as a teacher. And then sort of in term one, towards the middle or end of term one, you'll usually have a conference where the people who went and marked at the examination centres come back and feed back that information about how they marked the exam back to all of the teachers in each state. And one of the things I'm noticing more and more is those examination centres come back and say, these things were required to get full marks, that were not necessarily adequately communicated to the teachers at the beginning. So there's examples of there's an example, I don't know if I'm allowed to share all of these examples, but like one where a new curriculum came in and it wasn't mentioned to all of the teachers in a certain state that a certain thing needed to be included in one of the assessments, so no one in that state got an A+ rather than an A in that whole year in that subject because they forgot to tell them that they needed to include one particular thing that wasn't written anywhere in the syllabus or the assessment guidelines. And one thing that I found really interesting, I went to the Meet the Markers conference for the science teachers just recently. And as you know, the New South Wales chemistry curriculum has changed over recently. And I've just, I felt this feeling of anxiety around how much a lot of the teachers there felt really like there was stuff that they needed to be teaching that wasn't written anywhere. And that frustration is immense because you're trying your absolute best to get these students the best that they possibly can. But there's this limitation when if the teacher doesn't know they're supposed to be teaching a thing, and then the student needs to know that at the end, they're not getting that. And so one of the examples was, if you've looked at the HSC exam at the end of last year, there was a back titration in it. And I can't remember off the top of my head the details of the syllabus, but there are a lot of teachers saying in the chat, oh my gosh, why was there a back titration? I didn't think that was even in the syllabus. And in South Australia, we specifically, it says indirect titrations, normal titrations, and back titrations. And so when a teacher's reading the New South Wales syllabus, do they just teach direct titrations, or do they do indirect and back, or just back? And those kinds of things. And I think there were some issues around the atomic absorption, the NMR spectroscopy in the first year of the New South Wales syllabus as well. I think you were telling me about that a lot of teachers thought it was the old syllabus was explaining the machinery, how that worked, how it went through it, rather than interpreting the spectrum.
I think I remember that chat. It might have been, I think it was someone else in the group in the time that we were talking about that. But I think it was the old syllabus didn't have any real spectroscopy in it, so I think people talk about the machines by default because they guessed what might be relevant.
And with the atomic absorption spectroscopy, we always talked about the root through the machine.
Oh, yes, you're right. So the only spectroscopy that was in the old New South Wales syllabus was AAS, and you're right, that was about the machine.
It wasn't about interpreting the results or anything like that. Maybe there was a bit on concentration, but there wasn't...
Yeah, it wasn't much. It was more like reading the gradient off like the theoretical graph.
So in the first year of the new New South Wales syllabus, apparently a lot of teachers interpreted that as, we need to know how the machine of the NMR works. And then the exam came out and the students needed to interpret the results, and they hadn't spent a lot of time trying to interpret the results. And of course now everyone knows that they need to be interpreting the results of an NMR spectrum, but what about all those poor students who got that question wrong because those poor teachers had no idea that that's what the syllabus meant? And I think there's a lot of... To me, that's unfair and unjust when a syllabus is written in a way that means that only the people who are already in the know what it means. I think it should be something that's accessible to everyone, so everyone has an equal chance at success.
Yeah. I wonder what could have been done better in execution, because I think I do find, when I did talk to some various teachers, I feel like there was that impression where they kind of knew, like, either way, the new syllabus was going to be confusing. Yeah. And I guess they resigned themselves to, like, it'll be kind of crap for a few years and we'll sort of work it out until then. But as you mentioned, it's not a great way to go, because in the meantime, there are those students who are missing out.
And there's a lot of anxiety around it, and we have a lot of really high stakes where the school is judged on
some
those
teachers
marks,
have a lot of pressure.
The teachers are judged on those marks, children are judging themselves on those marks, their future, getting into university, if that is their chosen future, is affected by that. And none of that's fair,
Yeah. Like, the only thing I can imagine is maybe if, like, the syllabus writers, like the higher authorities on this stuff, maybe were more, like, publicly available to answer queries, but even then that would be logistically like so difficult to do.
And that's one of my big questions in my research. I'm spending a lot of time reading about the design of the curriculum, how they decided to write it, how they decided to communicate what was in it and why, and what the international literature says about what the best way to do it is. There's a lot of literature I've read that talks about the importance of providing examples, good examples of assessment tasks that fit with the syllabus, good examples of completed assessment tasks and how you'd mark that against the rubric. And I think because of the way the Australian syllabus, or the Australian curriculum, was rolled out then into state syllabuses, the states had control over writing their own syllabus and then providing those examples, and they spent a lot of time writing the syllabus, but I don't know if any of the states really did a good job, like really had enough resources themselves to provide any examples. So I know particularly in the South Australian example, there was a new type of assessment, the Science as a Human Endeavour assessment, that came into... There was an old issues investigation where students would look at, like, do they agree or disagree with this ethical issue, basically. And the new assessment was like, no, it's not a research task. It's kind of a nature of science task. It's not that, it's not that, it's not that. But no clear example of what it actually was. So the first year, everyone was just so confused. Research internationally talks about the importance of showing examples of what you should be doing, providing teachers with support materials. And I think the way we've rolled our curriculum out from national to state level and then left the states with that responsibility but not the resources or time has meant that none of them have really provided enough support for the teachers to implement the intended curriculum.
All right, well, that was a pretty good chat. I think we went through a lot of things. So I guess just to summarize things, Jen, do you want to sort of like go through and talk about, I guess, the things we discussed today?
Yeah, I think we talked about my background and how I sort of was really lucky enough to follow the passions. Like I found things in life that didn't sit well with me, and I realized that I could find a career that allowed me to put my skills towards fixing some of those things or contributing to fixing some of those things. We were talking about how good that can make you feel and how much joy you can have in life if you find a career like that allows you to use your skills to work towards something that you really want to be working towards. We talked about the importance of, I think, teaching being valued in society, and how much at the moment, particularly in maybe like higher academic circles, teaching in primary and secondary school, it's not really appreciated how much it does have an impact on individuals and on society. And then we talked a bit about my research, my master's, where I'm looking at the Australian curriculum, state curriculums, particularly year 11 and 12, and looking at how we can support teachers in implementing active learning, like experiments and practicals and discussions in the classroom.
Yeah. Sounds good. And I think, I guess one thing that really resonated with me in terms of the stuff you're talking about is this idea of forming these collaborative networks with these teachers. I think it's something that I personally am really hoping I can do something with in the next few years, because it's like, like on the one hand, like I do want to work with like a bigger group of people to push this change through. But I also know that like I guess it's a bit more unprecedented from my background to be like on the one hand, it's as I say, like on the outside, Atlas looks like a tutoring center, but I really hope, you know, we can evolve it to be something a bit more than that. And I'm hoping that might allow us to really work with schools if they can, you know, if I can somehow let the teachers know that, like, you know, I don't want to work with you just to make money or like to advertise myself or something, but like we want to actually collaborate and sort of share ideas. And I'm hoping something like that can be possible in the future.
Yeah, I'm sure it will.
But yeah, got to find the right teachers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds
With time,
good.
yeah.
Anyway, so that was a pretty good chat. Hopefully you guys listening as well enjoyed it. But yeah, if that's all, we'll wrap it up for here. So we'll see you guys next time. Bye guys.